The kitchen light cast harsh shadows across Lauren's abandoned phone when I found it at 2 a.m. My wife, the brilliant CFO who could audit a company's soul, had left her burner device right next to the coffee maker like some amateur criminal. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Nothing says I love you like finding your spouse's secret communications, I muttered, scrolling through messages that made my stomach turn. The contact name Van appeared dozens of times, each text more intimate than our conversations had been in months. Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Brendan's working late again. Perfect timing. Your husband looked pathetic at the meeting today. How do you stand him? After the divorce, we can finally be together properly. I'm Brendan Ortiz, 40 years old, senior software architect at a mid-sized tech firm in suburban Massachusetts. For 15 years, I've been married to Lauren King Ortiz, a woman whose ambition could power a small city and whose coldness could freeze hell itself. She kept her maiden name professionally, which should have been my first warning sign. The house around me felt different now, not like a home, but like a crime scene waiting to be discovered. Every perfectly arranged throw pillow, every strategically placed corporate award, every family photo where Lauren's smile looked increasingly forced, it all made sense now. Van, Evan Dorsey. I knew him from Lauren's company events. Sales VP, expensive suits, the kind of guy who called everyone buddy while planning to stab them in the back. He'd always made comments about my little tech job compared to Lauren's real career in finance. Now I understood why he felt so comfortable disrespecting me. My phone buzzed. Lauren texting from upstairs. Working late tomorrow. Don't wait up. I almost laughed. The woman was literally planning her affair while I stood in our kitchen, reading the evidence of her betrayal. The irony was beautiful in its own twisted way. But here's the thing about being an underdog your whole life. You learn patience. You learn to watch, to plan, to wait for the perfect moment. Lauren thought she was dealing with the same pushover who'd spent years accommodating her career moves, her social climbing, her gradual transformation from the woman I'd married into this corporate ice queen. She was about to discover she'd miscalculated badly. I spent the next hour photographing every message, every photo, every piece of evidence on that phone. Then I carefully placed it exactly where I'd found it. Lauren's first mistake was underestimating me. Her second was leaving a digital trail that would make any forensic accountant weep with joy. The next morning, Lauren swept into the kitchen wearing her power suit like armor, her blonde hair pulled into that severe bun she favored for important meetings. "Morning, honey," she said without looking up from her primary phone. "I've got the quarterly board presentation today. Might run late." "Of course," I replied, sipping my coffee and watching her performance. "Big day for the company?" She finally glanced at me, and for a moment I saw something flicker in her green eyes. Guilt? Annoyance that I existed? Hard to tell with Lauren these days. "Brendan, about yesterday's incident at the office." She paused, clearly choosing her words carefully. "Some people thought your comments during my presentation were inappropriate." "The incident." "Right." I'd made the mistake of asking a legitimate technical question during her all-hands meeting, and she'd shut me down in front of 200 employees like I was some intern who'd spoken out of turn. "I was just trying to help clarify the integration timeline," I said mildly. "It looked like you were challenging my authority. In front of my entire team." Her voice carried that familiar edge, the one that had been growing sharper over the past year. "I need you to understand. At work, I'm the CFO. Period." "Got it. The CFO's husband should know his place." She studied my face, looking for sarcasm, but I'd learned to hide my thoughts from her long ago. After a moment, she nodded and grabbed her purse. "I'll be late tonight. There's leftover Thai food in the fridge." After she left, I sat in the silence of our perfectly decorated home and made my decision. Lauren wanted to play corporate power games? Fine. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd spent 15 years watching her work, learning her methods, understanding how she dismantled her enemies with surgical precision. Time to give her a masterclass in her own techniques. I called in sick to work and spent the day setting up my infrastructure. New email accounts, encrypted cloud storage, a detailed spreadsheet tracking Lauren's movements and communications. If she wanted to conduct an affair, she'd do it under the most thorough audit of her life. By evening, I'd installed tracking software on our shared devices, accessed her calendar through our family account, and created a comprehensive timeline of her deception. The woman who'd built her career on finding discrepancies in financial records had left more holes in her story than a mob accountant. When Lauren came home at midnight, reeking of expensive cologne that definitely wasn't mine, I was waiting in the living room with a glass of wine and a smile. "How was the meeting?" I asked. "Exhausting. These board presentations always run long." She avoided eye contact, heading straight for the stairs. "I'm going to shower and go to bed." "Sweet dreams, honey." She paused on the third step, something in my tone making her turn back. For a moment, we stared at each other across the space that had grown between us over the years. Then she shook her head and continued upstairs. I finished my wine and opened my laptop. Phase 1 of the audit was complete. Time to begin the real investigation. The next few weeks fell into a routine that would have been almost peaceful if I weren't documenting my wife's systematic betrayal of our marriage. Lauren maintained her schedule of late meetings and client dinners, while I built an airtight case that would have impressed any divorce attorney in the state. My office friend Nina Martinez became an unwitting accomplice in my investigation. She worked in marketing at Lauren's company and had always been friendly, the kind of person who knew everyone's business without being malicious about it. "Your wife's been putting in serious hours lately," Nina mentioned during our weekly coffee meetup. "I saw her leaving with Evan Dorsey again yesterday around lunch. They make a good team." "Team?" I kept my voice casual, stirring sugar into my coffee. "You know, the CFO and VP of sales. They've been working on some big client acquisition project. Very hush-hush." Nina leaned forward conspiratorially. "Though between you and me, some people are starting to talk." "Talk about what?" "Come on, Brendan. You've seen how they look at each other in meetings, and Lauren's been different lately, more confident, like she's got some secret that makes her happy." I wanted to laugh at the irony. Lauren's secret was making her happy, all right. It was making me homicidal. "People love to gossip," I said instead. "True. But when the gossip involves the CFO and a married VP spending an awful lot of time together," Nina shrugged. "Just thought you should know what people are saying." What people were saying was nothing compared to what I was documenting. Lauren's digital footprint painted a picture of a woman who'd been planning her exit strategy for months. Hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, even apartment listings in the next town over, all carefully hidden in accounts she thought I'd never access. The beautiful thing about living with someone for 15 years is that you know all their passwords, security questions, and digital habits. Lauren had always been careless with personal cybersecurity, probably because she never imagined her husband would have reason to investigate her. Her mistake. I discovered they'd been meeting every Tuesday and Thursday at the Marriott downtown. Van had a corporate account, and Lauren had been joining him for business lunches that lasted 3 hours and included champagne service. The paper trail was so obvious it was almost insulting. But the real breakthrough came when I found Lauren's personal journal on her laptop. She'd been documenting her affair like some lovesick teenager, complete with detailed plans for her new life with Van. Brendan seems completely oblivious. Sometimes I think he's actually relieved that I'm not bothering him anymore. He's always been weak, content to let me handle everything important while he plays with his computers. Van makes me feel powerful, desired, like the woman I was meant to be. We talked about timeline today. Van thinks we should wait until after his promotion is confirmed, then we can both make our moves. Divorce Brendan, leave the company together, start fresh somewhere that appreciates our talents. I feel guilty sometimes, but then I remember how Brendan embarrassed me at the Johnson account presentation. He has no understanding of professional dynamics. Van would never undermine me like that. Reading her thoughts about our marriage was like getting a psychological autopsy report. Every small moment I'd thought was just Lauren being stressed or distracted was actually her slowly disconnecting from our life together. She'd been emotionally divorced from me for months. The final entry was dated 3 days ago. Van says after we're both established in our new positions, we should consider having a child together. The idea terrifies and excites me. I never wanted kids with Brendan. He's too passive, too willing to settle for mediocrity. But with Van, I can imagine building something extraordinary. I closed the laptop and sat in the darkness of my home office, processing the full scope of Lauren's betrayal. This wasn't just an affair, it was a complete life replacement plan. She'd written me out of her future so thoroughly that I might as well have been over already. Well, if Lauren wanted to treat our marriage like a failed business venture, I'd give her the audit she deserved. The next morning, I implemented phase 2 of my plan. I'd spent years watching Lauren destroy her professional enemies with leaked information, strategic alliances, and perfectly timed revelations. Time to see how she handled being on the receiving end. I started with Van's wife, Rebecca. A quick social media search revealed she was a successful real estate agent with her own firm and 2 teenage kids from Van's first marriage. She posted regularly about family dinners, school events, and business achievements. The woman had no idea her husband was planning to abandon their life together. I created an anonymous email account and sent Rebecca a simple message with photo evidence. Thought you should know what your husband does during his business lunches. Then I waited. The explosion came faster than I'd expected. By noon, Nina was texting me urgent updates from the office. Holy shit, Van's wife just showed up and caused a scene in the lobby. Security had to escort her out. She was screaming about affairs and divorce lawyers. Lauren looked like she'd seen a ghost during the afternoon meeting. She kept checking her phone and couldn't focus on the quarterly numbers. Van left early with a black eye. Word is his wife threw a picture frame at him. I spent the evening monitoring Lauren's behavior as she came home 2 hours earlier than usual, her perfect composure finally cracking. Rough day at the office? I asked innocently. There was some drama with one of the VPs, personal issues affecting the workplace. She poured herself a large glass of wine, her hands shaking slightly. It's nothing that concerns you. Of course not. I'm just the husband. She shot me a sharp look, but I was already heading upstairs, leaving her alone with her wine and her guilt. Phase 2 was complete. Time to escalate to Phase 3. Lauren's carefully constructed world began crumbling faster than she could manage the damage. Over the next week, I watched her struggle to maintain her professional composure while her personal life imploded in real time. Van's wife, Rebecca, had hired a private investigator and a divorce attorney who specialized in high-asset cases. The legal pressure was immediate and devastating. Frozen accounts, asset seizure, and a restraining order that prevented Van from contacting Lauren directly. But Lauren didn't know I was orchestrating the chaos. As far as she knew, she was just experiencing a run of bad luck. I need to ask you something, she said one evening, cornering me in the kitchen as I prepared dinner. Her usual confidence had been replaced by something I'd never seen before, genuine fear. What's on your mind? Have you been talking to anyone about our marriage? About me? I looked up from chopping vegetables, meeting her eyes with practiced innocence. Talking to who? About what? I don't know. It's just... She ran her hands through her hair, destroying her perfect styling. Things at work have been strange lately. People are looking at me differently. And with Van's situation... Van's situation? His wife filed for divorce. She claims he's been having an affair. Lauren's voice was carefully neutral, but I could see the panic behind her eyes. It's affecting the whole executive team. That's terrible. Workplace affairs never end well. She studied my face for any sign that I knew more than I was letting on. No, they don't. I returned to my cooking, letting the silence stretch between us. Finally, Lauren poured herself another glass of wine and retreated to her home office. Within minutes, I could hear her on the phone, her voice low and urgent. Through the baby monitor I'd strategically placed in her office, a relic from when we'd briefly tried to have children, I listened to her side of what was clearly a conversation with Van. No, I don't think he knows anything. Yes, I'm sure. We just need to be more careful until this blows over. What do you mean you can't see me anymore? Van, don't you dare abandon me now. The conversation ended with Lauren slamming her phone down hard enough to rattle her desk. I smiled and continued preparing our dinner. But my real masterstroke was still coming. The next day, I took a personal day and drove to Lauren's office building. I'd been there dozens of times for company events, so security knew me as the CFO's husband. Getting to the executive floor was simple. I found Van in his office, looking haggard and desperate. His usually perfect appearance was disheveled, his expensive suit wrinkled, and he had the hollow-eyed look of a man whose life was falling apart in real time. Brendan? He looked up from his desk, clearly surprised to see me. What are you doing here? I closed his office door behind me and sat down in the chair across from his desk. I thought we should have a conversation, man to man. Van's face went pale. About what? About my wife. About your wife. About the interesting situation you've both found yourselves in. For a long moment, we stared at each other across his desk. Van was the first to break. Look, Brendan, I don't know what you think you know. I know everything. I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos from Lauren's burner device. I know about the hotel meetings. I know about your plans to leave your respective spouses. I know about the apartment you were looking at together. Van's face crumpled. How long have you known? Long enough to document everything. Long enough to make sure Rebecca got the evidence she needed for her divorce case. Long enough to prepare my own exit strategy. What do you want? His voice was barely a whisper. I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the moment. For years, this man had treated me like Lauren's embarrassing accessory, making snide comments about my career and my worth. Now he was begging for mercy. I want you to understand something, Van. You thought you were taking my wife from some pathetic loser who wouldn't fight back. But you made a mistake. You assumed I was weak because I was quiet. You confuse patience with stupidity. Brendan, please, I'm not finished. My voice carried a steel I'd never used before, and Van actually flinched. You destroyed your own marriage for a woman who's about to discover she backed the wrong horse, because while you were planning your future together, I was planning your destruction. I stood up and walked to his office window, looking down at the parking lot where Lauren's BMW sat in her reserved executive space. Your wife is taking half of everything you own. Your kids are going to grow up knowing their father is a cheater who abandoned them for his boss's wife. And your career? I turned back to face him. Well, that's about to get very interesting. What are you talking about? I pulled out a thick folder and placed it on his desk. Financial irregularities in your expense reports. Questionable client entertainment charges. Company resources used for personal activities. All meticulously documented and ready for submission to the board of directors. Van opened the folder with shaking hands, his face going from pale to green as he saw the evidence I'd compiled. This is... How did you... I'm a software architect, Van. Yeah, I understand systems, data analysis, pattern recognition, and I've had access to Lauren's computer for 15 years. She never changed her passwords, even for work systems. The beautiful irony was that everything in that folder was completely legitimate. Van had been sloppy with company money for years, using his corporate card for personal expenses and filing fraudulent reports. I'd simply organized the evidence in a way that would be impossible to ignore. You're going to resign, I continued. Today, you're going to cite personal reasons and recommend that the board conduct a full audit of your department, and you're never going to contact my wife again. And if I don't? I smiled, and something in my expression made Van push his chair back from his desk. Then Rebecca gets copies of Lauren's journal entries about your affair. The board gets this financial evidence along with documentation of your inappropriate workplace relationship with a direct report. And the local newspaper gets a very interesting story about executive corruption at one of the area's largest employers. Van stared at me for a long moment, then slowly nodded. You win. No, Van, I don't win. Nobody wins in this situation. But you and Lauren definitely lose. I left him sitting in his office, staring at the evidence of his own destruction. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with texts from Nina. Van just resigned, effective immediately. Lauren looked like she was going to pass out when HR made the announcement. Phase 3 was complete. Time for the finale. Lauren came home that night like a woman walking to her execution. Her perfect composure had finally shattered completely, leaving behind someone I barely recognized, vulnerable, desperate, and for the first time in years, genuinely afraid. She found me in the living room, reading a book and sipping wine as if nothing had happened. Van resigned today, she said without preamble. I heard, Nina mentioned it. Something about personal reasons? Lauren studied my face carefully. Brendan, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. I closed my book and gave her my full attention. Of course. Did you have anything to do with what's been happening to Van? To his wife finding out about their problems? The moment stretched between us like a tightrope. I could have continued the charade, maintained my innocent act, let her wonder and worry without ever knowing for certain. But after weeks of careful planning and patient execution, I wanted her to understand exactly who she'd been underestimating. Yes. The single word hit her like a physical blow. She actually staggered backward, gripping the door frame for support. What? I said yes. I orchestrated everything. Van's wife finding out about your affair, the evidence that forced his resignation, the systematic destruction of your carefully planned future together. I set down my wine and stood up, feeling taller than I had in years. I did all of it. Lauren's face cycled through a dozen emotions: shock, denial, anger, and finally, something that might have been respect. How long have you known? About your affair? 2 months. About your complete contempt for me and our marriage? Much longer. She sank into the chair across from me, her legs apparently unable to support her weight. Why didn't you just confront me? Ask for a divorce? I laughed, and the sound was harsh enough to make her flinch. Because you didn't just want to leave me, Lauren. You wanted to humiliate me. You wanted to make me the pathetic husband who got dumped for a better man. You wanted to rewrite our entire history to make yourself the victim of my inadequacy. That's not... I read your journal, all of it. Every entry about how weak I am, how embarrassing I am, how much better your life would be with Van. You didn't just plan to divorce me. You planned to destroy any dignity I might have left. Tears were streaming down her face now, but I felt no sympathy. She'd cried before when she wanted something from me, and I'd learned not to trust her emotions. So I decided to give you a taste of your own medicine. You've spent your career destroying people who crossed you, using information warfare and strategic manipulation to get what you wanted. I figured it was time you experienced those techniques from the other side. You ruined his life. Van's children? Van ruined his own life the moment he decided to have an affair with a married woman, and his children will be better off knowing their father's true character now rather than later. I leaned forward, my voice dropping to a whisper. Just like I'm better off knowing yours. Lauren wiped her eyes, and I could see her trying to regain her composure, to find some way to turn this situation to her advantage. It was fascinating to watch her mind work, even in defeat. What happens now? She asked finally. Now you have a choice. We can get divorced quietly, split our assets fairly, and go our separate ways with whatever dignity we have left. Or we can do this the hard way, with lawyers and depositions and all of your professional colleagues learning exactly why your marriage failed. You'd really do that? Humiliate me publicly? I thought about all the times she'd humiliated me privately, all the snide comments about my career, my ambitions, my worth as a man, all the ways she'd made me feel small and insignificant in my own home. In a heartbeat. She nodded slowly, finally understanding that the man she'd been married to for 15 years was gone, replaced by someone who'd learned from her own playbook. I choose the quiet divorce. Smart decision. Lauren stood up on unsteady legs, pausing at the doorway. For what it's worth, Brendan, I never meant for things to get this ugly. Yes, you did. You just never expected me to fight back. She left me alone in the living room, and I could hear her upstairs, making phone calls and packing bags. By morning, she was gone, leaving behind only a note with her lawyer's contact information. 3 months later, our divorce was finalized. Lauren had to resign from her CFO position when the board learned about her affair with a subordinate, and she took a lower-level job in another state. Van's divorce cost him half his assets and his relationship with his children. His new job paid a fraction of his previous salary. I kept our house, got a promotion at work, and started dating a woman from my hiking group who thought my dry sense of humor was charming rather than embarrassing. Sometimes I wonder if I went too far, if I could have handled the situation with more grace and forgiveness. But then I remember Lauren's journal entries, her complete dismissal of our marriage and my worth as a person, and I realized that some betrayals deserve exactly the response they get. She wanted to audit my value and find me lacking. Instead, she discovered that the underdog she'd been planning to discard had been conducting his own audit all along, and her balance sheet came up short.